in the Arctic to the north of us at such a rate, in fact, that the cold water now entering the North Atlantic is intersecting the North Atlantic conveyor, bringing warm water and nutrients up from the tropics and cooling that and slowing down this conveyor. And this is the conveyor that moderates climate across England and Europe. And you saw the huge windstorms and rainstorms this year, all the trees knocked down in France, the superstorms they're calling them. And we're seeing more and more of these superstorms. We're seeing rainfall patterns change, droughts, floods, tornadoes in winter. And it's the insurance company, not the environmentalists, that are pushing governments to act. The insurers are panicked. We're talking an industry even bigger than the arms industry and the fossil fuel mafia on this planet. They are very concerned that an unstable climate may destroy the insurance industry and take down the banks that back them. Insured losses were up 10 times from 83 to 92, and that was just the beginning. Lloyd's of London has lost $11 billion in 4 years, and I don't believe they're going to be able to sustain those kind of losses. Hurricane Andrew alone cost $15.5 billion to insurers, and now they're saying catastrophic losses from climatic extremes will total $30 billion a year here on out. At the same time, we have a real emergency with the shredding ozone layer that protects our spaceship Earth from solar radiation. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has revised its estimate of skin cancer deaths from 9,300 to 200,000 over the next 50 years. Now, in August 1998, there was an international seminar on planetary emergencies. And Edward Teller took an idea, first proposed in 1979 by the renowned physicist Freeman Dyson, who proposed that we insert sunlight-reflecting particles to deflect solar radiation and cool the planet. This wasn't just an idle theory, because when El Chicon erupted, the resulting fallout from that volcano slowed the global warming trend 25% and gave the people saying, well, there's really nothing to this global warming, quite a lot of ammunition for a year or two. So at that conference on planetary emergencies, when Edward Teller, the father of the H-bomb, stood up, he proposed a similar sunscreen. And he said, if we can block 1% of incoming solar radiation and reflect it back into space, we will neutralize global warming. I have some very good researchers working for me, and they have very recently come up with a paper, a study done at the request of the U.S. government by the Lawrence Livermore Lab, the national laboratory in the United States. And they looked at this and they said, we can do this. It will cost us $1 billion a year. And that's 1% of the $100 billion a year it will cost our economy if we have to curtail fossil fuel use back to 1990 levels to slow global warming. Oh, sure, we can go to the solar age and alternative technologies that you know and I know are available. And of course, the oil cartel doesn't want us to do that. So here's an idea. We spray this sunscreen, we cool the planet slightly, and we can go on burning fossil fuels and the corporations can go on making their profits. An environmental consultant named Mike Castle, who consults to the U.S. government and other corporations in the United States, got in touch with me and thought, maybe this is what's going on. And then he discovered a patent, actually taken out and awarded to one of the big aerospace defense contractors in the United States, Hughes Aerospace, patent 1990000513145. Stratospheric well-back seating for reduction of global warming. A process to reflect infrared energy back into space. And this patent called for chemicals to be sprayed into the greenhouse gas layer, wait for this, 22,000 feet and higher. What were they going to spray? Oxides of metal. Which oxide? Aluminum oxide. Now you're saying, well, that's a heck of a lot of airplanes flying a lot of missions to spray that kind of material. So we turned to the United States Air Force, and you know what I found? They happen to own over 800 tanker aircraft, KC-135 and KC-10 aircraft. Exactly the planes that we have positively identified in hundreds of photographs and miles of videotape as the aircraft spraying these chemtrails. So could this really be happening? I mean, we have the study, we have the airplanes, we have the money, we have the patent, and we have the primary ingredient, aluminum. Well, we also have scientific proof. Because the people of Espanola, Ontario did not sit by and take the spraying in their community and resulting sickness among their families and children lying down. This is an Ojibwe community, about 80 miles to the west of Sudbury, Ontario. And in March last year, they began noticing these jets flying, these crisscross patterns overhead, and they came down with joint pain and stiffness, often on the left side of their bodies, extreme upper respiratory problems, gastrointestinal problems, illness throughout the community. And then they saw low-flying aircraft come over, C-130s, spraying a red powderish material. My colleague went up there at that time and collected a sample just after the latest incident. We had it tested. Hundreds and hundreds of pathogenic molds and fungi in that spray, that low-level spray. But what about the higher-level spray? The people of Espanola raised such a ruckus that the Ministry of Environment Ontario was forced to get involved, and they ran tests on rainwater following the heavy spray days. And guess what they found? They found carbon black, which the United States Air Force says they use for weather modification. They found hundreds of molds, fungi, but most of what they found was aluminum. 7 times the safe levels. Aluminum at levels the North Lab said would kill fish. We have the lab test, we have the study. It matches the Hughes patent. It matches what Edward Teller and Freeman Dyson and others were calling for. And it certainly looks to me tonight that what we are seeing is an attempt, a desperate attempt, at atmospheric modification. But weather is also being modified. We ask the United States, what the heck's going on? And they say, here's our report, Owning the Weather, 2025.
I'm Noam Chomsky. You're watching Working TV on cable.
As yet, my researchers and I have found absolutely no indication that the pathogens that are turning up in the gel samples, the cobweb material, have anything whatsoever to do with weather or environmental modification. There seems to be a second program at work here. In January of this year, there was a high-level summit conference. You may not have read about it in the local newspapers or heard about it on the CBC for some reason or other. This was a conference on the changing demographics on this planet, the aging population, and its threat to corporate profits and to defense budgets in particular. We had the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank representatives were there, very high-level people, and they were discussing what in the world are we going to do with the aging population. At least those are the words they used. Other words that have been used in the past are useless eaters. People who become elderly and no longer contribute monetarily to society and become a burden on society in terms of social assistance and especially Medicare. And as that becomes the preponderance in our population, there is a lot of concern among corporations in particular about their bottom line. The eugenics movement got its start in 1907 in the United States when the first eugenics law was passed there. And by 1944, 40,000 so-called insane or feeble-minded people had been forcibly sterilized. Another 22,000 as recently as 1963. Now, in the 1920s, the Rockefeller Foundation, who became a principal promoter of depopulation, called for the mass sterilization and elimination of minority populations in the United States. And to head their program, they chose the fascists Ernest Rudin and Franz Kallmann. Of course, it was Rockefeller Standard Oil that got together with I.G. Farben during that war. It became virtually the same corporation. It was Farben who made the nerve gas that killed more than 6 million Jewish people. Rudin himself went on to become part of the Nazi state and became president of the Worldwide Eugenics Federation. His sterilization law was adapted by the United States as law in July 1933 as a model, with Hitler's signature attached. Kallmann went on to head the American Society of Human Genetics, the Human Genome Project you've been hearing so much about recently. You haven't heard about its Nazi antecedents. That's a $3 billion effort, of course, to map DNA by the year 2003, and they're well on their way. That's going to be pretty nifty because apparently we'll be able to identify genetically caused diseases, go in there and tinker around and eliminate those diseases. What they're not stressing in the news reports is that we'll also be able to identify race-specific diseases so that we can attack specific populations of people with diseases that will only kill them. In the 1950s, the U.S. eugenics movement moved literally into Rockefeller's family offices. Lawrence Rockefeller became head of the New York City Blood Council and then International Blood Banking. These are the eugenics people. 1960s, General William Draper. He supplied credit to the Nazis during World War II, and now he started the Draper Fund. The Vietnam generals we've all heard about, Maxwell Taylor, William Westmoreland, who headed that genocide and dioxin defoliation campaign in Vietnam. They were members of the Population Crisis Committee of the William Draper Fund. In 1964, the former commanding general, U.S. Army Chemical Corps, listed bioweapons favored by the U.S. military. There's a long list, I won't go into it, but let's note brucellosis, influenza, Rocky Mountain spotted fever. Congressional investigations in 1977 and 1994 documented 50 years of biowarfare experimentations I mentioned earlier. 1969, a man named George Bush, son of the eugenics advocate and Nazi bankroller Prescott Bush, this is all documented, by the way, chaired a committee urging world population control. Just 1 year later, Henry Kissinger, National Security Advisor to President Nixon, issued National Security Memorandum 200 calling for a reduction of the populations of the lesser developed countries, that is the growth rate, by half. By half. He said we have to depopulate 14 countries or the U.S. will face a crisis worse than nuclear war. Kissinger said we can decrease the birth rate or increase the death rate. It's too bad he said we can't use nuclear weapons. It's a little obvious, but we have something even better. In fact, it was Kissinger who took the U.S. biowarfare program underground when Nixon publicly outlawed it and declared the U.S. was getting out of the biowarfare business. Kissinger made sure that program continued. There was another national security advisor to Nixon at the very same time. His name was Roy Ash. He's the president of Lytton Bionetics. And anyone who's reading Len Horowitz's excellent books, AIDS and Ebola and Healing Codes for the Biological Apocalypse, will be running into this name, Lytton Bionetics. And they were tasked with developing immune systems destroyers and cancer agents. They were the head of all experiments at Fort Detrick, and they were in charge of all monkey cultures and viruses in the United States. Lytton Bionetics, Roy Ash, national security advisor to the United States government. Let's get back to Mr. Kissinger in 1969, what a year that was. Because during that year, in the closed-door sessions for defense appropriations hearing, Dr. MacArthur stood up and said, secretly, after 24 years of biological warfare research that was started, by the way, with the first head of that program, George Merck, the founder of Merck Pharmaceutical Company, also heavy funders of world depopulation. 24 years of biological warfare research, 76 biological warfare labs, $31 million, a lot of money in those days, that year, for these heinous weapons. He said, let's add $10 million more to the pot, and we will develop the ultimate stealth weapon, a synthetic bioagent for which no natural immunity exists. He told the Congressional Committee, we'll probably have to deliver these as a primary aerosol through the air, and will infect people inhaling it. Now, he said this can be incapacitating or lethal, depending on what brew we use and the victim's general health. Oh, he said we might have a problem. Some people might think this is genocidal. We might have a publicity problem, but we can do the job. That money was awarded. The work did go forward. And an immunodeficiency disease was perfected at Fort Detrick, Maryland. And it was tested at the Tahoe Truckee High School. And 7 of the 8 young victims there developed chronic fatigue. Now, in 1970, Robert Gallo synthesized an AIDS-like virus under this program. And 2 years later, the WHO said the best way to test these new viruses is in vaccines, particularly among siblings. And isn't it interesting that in 1977, 100 million Africans were inoculated by the WHO, who set up a very high-tech lab near Angola in the middle of the jungle, and out of the goodness of their hearts, vaccinated these folks for smallpox, for an epidemic of smallpox. But there was no epidemic of smallpox. And they contracted AIDS. A year later, the hepatitis V vaccine was given to gays in the United States in 7 major cities. And you know what happened? AIDS broke out in those cities and only those cities. And I mentioned the International Summit on Aging and the Implications for Business. Did I mention that today all 14 countries cited by Kissinger in that Memorandum 200 now have the AIDS epidemic? 5,000 people a day are dying in Africa, according to the U.S. Census Bureau, which predicts that AIDS will be bigger in Asia even than Africa. Talking to nurses across the United States, anecdotally, we have an increase in the death rate among the elderly in hospital wards of roughly 4, 5, 6% following this chemtrail attack on our cities and communities. A number that is not going to leave bodies piled in the streets. Oh, oops, sorry. Oh, we had a few incidents there in England. We had to bring some trucks in and haul them away, get them out of sight. But this is a significant number over time, and if it climbs to 10%, that's a dictionary definition of a decimation of a population. In fact, Pope John Paul has come out with an encyclical railing against what he calls the culture of death in Western nations, that he says are deliberately killing their elderly, whom they see as burdens on society. So I guess if it's good enough for the Pope, it's good enough for me, and we have a real problem here, folks. Are those deaths that have been so often linked to this spraying intentional? Are they really trying to do us in? Or are they an unfortunate and unintentional byproduct of a program that is seen to have overriding national security implications in terms of global warming? Or are the people behind this program getting 2 for the price of 1? I'll just say this, that when you institute a program of mass spraying across the populations of the United States, Canada, England, Germany, as recently as a week ago, Holland, Italy, Australia, New Zealand. And at the same time, you know that people are being hospitalized, according to U.S. news sources, by the tens of millions in the United States. And you know your death rate is up in epidemic proportions for 19 of 20 weeks, and you continue to spray. I call that deliberate. What in the world can we do? We have been virtually disempowered by a political process that does not answer to the public, by politicians who do not hold themselves accountable to anyone, not even God, and God help them. Thanks to the good people of Espanola, there is something we can do, and I urge all of you to do this and contact your friends and get onto your MP and demand and insistently demand and persistently insist that the people of Espanola receive a response to their petition to Parliament in Ottawa. They were promised a response from Ministry of Defense. That was about 5 months ago. And we want a response to them, because in so doing, we will have a response to the inhabitants of this city and region. And I urge you, get on the fax, get on the phone, and don't stop until the people of Espanola have an answer. Until they have the truth, and we have the truth, and we have some accountability at last. Secondly, get on the phone, call the Vancouver Sun, my former employer, Vancouver Province, the CBC. Again, they've interviewed me at length, never ran the tape. And say, you heard this guy talking, and he has some very disturbing photographs and even more disturbing things to say, and he's a journalist, he's won awards, he doesn't appear to be too crazy, and heck, I've seen it myself. Tell them, why aren't you reporting this? And don't stop until they do. Because once someone in the mainstream media picks up this story, the others will have to follow. It's the herd instinct. No one wants to be scooped.
So that's it for today. Thanks for watching. As always, please help keep this show on air by letting your cable company know that you're watching. Or better yet, tell them what you think of the show. They transcribe every one of your calls and pass them on to us. We'd love to hear what you think about chemtrails. Next week, we'll be on holiday, so we'll air a rerun of one of our favorite shows from 1999. We'll be back in 2 weeks with more new programming. Check our website for details. See you in 2 weeks. Bye for now.
Very, very important that we apply public pressure here. Very important that we take our power back, and it's very important to understand, though we've heard a lot of frightening things tonight, biological weapons, bullets and bombs and planes and money, that's not power. That has nothing to do with power. The real power is here. It's all around us. And if we align to it, if we pray for it, if we invite it into our lives, there is nothing that can stop us and nothing that can stop the truth. And the one thing the people responsible for this are afraid of the most, and the one thing they cannot counteract with all the weapons and money at their command, is the truth. And the kind of power I'm talking about, which is the real power, will triumph in the end. Because evil of this magnitude always fails of its own accord, of its own contradiction, of its very evilness.